How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, December 31st, 2021. And for my final episode of the 2021 calendar year, I'm going to do a preview for today's college football semifinal matchups. Coming into this round, there are now 4 teams that are competing for the 2021 and 2022 college football title. And of course, all 4 of the teams that made it here were incredible teams, and they all deserve to be here. I'm going to walk you through how each team made it here, and of course I'm going to at least give my idea as to what I think is going to happen today, because I think this was a very SEC dominant season, so I think both of the SEC teams are going to make it. But regardless, I'm going to take you through both matchups. So the first matchup for the college football semifinal that's going to take place today will be at 3:30. That's going to be the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic, as that matchup takes place in Dallas every single year. It's going to feature the 4th-ranked Cincinnati Bearcats out of the American Conference and the 1st-seed Alabama Crimson Tide, who just beat Georgia in the SEC Championship. First, looking at how Cincinnati got there, they would finish with a 13-0 record with their regular season, as they were going to finish the American Conference with an 8-0 record right before they went on to beat Houston. And just even looking at some of the big matchups that they've had, their 4th matchup, they did go on to beat the 9th-ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish, just to give a sense of what they were doing there. And of course, taking a look at their last game against the Houston Cougars, they did win this matchup by about 15. Desmond Ridder would throw for 190 yards and 3 touchdowns, not to mention that Jerome Ford had 190 yards on the ground, over 200 yards of total offense, as they finished that season undefeated. Taking a look now at how the Alabama Crimson Tide have gotten here, Alabama would finish with a 12-1 record, as they would go on to finish the SEC with a 7-1 record. Their only loss coming to Texas A&M, an unranked opponent in the 6th week, as they lost by a field goal. But looking at the ranked teams that Alabama has beaten in their very first matchup, they shellacked Miami by 31 points. They won that matchup 44-33. Their Heisman quarterback, Bryce Young, would end up throwing for 344 yards. That was all through the air, and he had his 4 touchdowns. Not to mention that Jamison Williams was playing incredibly well. Taking a look at their next ranked opponent, they ended up beating the then 11th ranked Florida Gators by 2, as that one was that would be a very close game. Florida tried to tie it up on a 2-point conversion, but they would end up falling just short. And then, of course, looking at how Alabama fared on the other end, of course, Bryce Young would throw for his 3 touchdowns and 240 yards. So that was their second big matchup. The next ranked opponent they faced off against was 12th ranked Ole Miss in Week 5. This is the week right before they lost. They won this matchup 42-21, as they shut Ole Miss out 28-0 in the first half. In this matchup, their big performer was their running back, Brian Robinson Jr. He had 171 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. So, of course, that is how Alabama kind of rolls in situations like this. Their next ranked opponent would be Arkansas, as that was their last ranked opponent of the year. That was their second to last week. They ended up winning this matchup by a touchdown, as they did hold this game at arm's length for a good chunk of the game. In this game, Bryce Young, their quarterback, I think he earned his Heisman this game, where he threw for 559 yards and 5 touchdowns to help Alabama at least win out following their embarrassing loss to an unranked opponent. Their next big matchup would take place at the University of Georgia, where they would end up winning. They played against UGA in the SEC Championship game. Alabama would end up beating Georgia 41-24 after they outscored Georgia by 24-17 in the first half, and they outscored Georgia 17-7 in the second half. In this matchup, Bryce Young would throw for 421 yards and 3 touchdowns, as Jamison Williams almost had 200 total yards, as he had 2 receiving touchdowns. So that was how Alabama was able to make it here. And of course, I believe this matchup should go Alabama's way, but I don't think they should underestimate Clemson, because Clemson got here off of the amazing play of their quarterback, Desmond Ridder, as he is already, I imagine he's going down as Cincinnati's best quarterback of all time. And Alabama usually needs to watch out when they play against historically great college football quarterbacks. Taking a look at the other matchup that's going to be taking place right after, That's going to be the Capital One Orange Bowl that takes place in Miami. That's going to feature the third-ranked Georgia Bulldogs out of the SEC, and is going to feature the second-ranked Michigan Wolverines, who won the Big Ten. The Georgia Bulldogs coming into this matchup as the only one of the four teams that did not win their conference championship. They would go on to finish their regular season with a 13-0 record, as their one loss came in the SEC championship game to Alabama. Taking a look at how Georgia got here, looking at their matchups, their first ranked matchup was a 10-3 win versus Clemson, as their lone touchdown came off of a 74-yard pick six, and that set the Clemson's season in motion. 5 or 4 weeks later, they would face off against the 8th-ranked Arkansas Razorbacks and shut them out 37-0. And of course, for Georgia, a big amount of their contribution would come on the ground. They had 3 rushing touchdowns on the day. Not to mention their team was just humming. They kept Arkansas a top 10 team scoreless. They were the 8th-ranked team in the nation at the time. Their very next week, they would have to face off against an 18th-ranked Auburn team at Auburn. Georgia ended up beating Auburn 34-10. They would go on to be led by Stetson Bennett, who threw for 231 yards and 2 touchdowns, as Zamir White had 79 yards on the ground with his 2 touchdowns. And of course, Georgia's biggest performer on the offense would actually be their receiver, Ladd McConkey, who had 135 yards and a touchdown. So that was Georgia's 3rd-ranked win of the season. The very next week, their 3rd week in a row, facing off against a ranked opponent in their 7th week of the season, they would go on to beat 11th-ranked Kentucky 30-33. They were going to be led by Stetson Bennett, who threw for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, as they kept Georgia undefeated. Their very next ranked opponent they would face off against would be the 3rd-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide in the championship game. And they did fall short, as they got outscored by a touchdown in the first half, and they got outscored by 10 points in the second half. Their biggest performer was Stetson Bennett, who threw for 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Brock Bowers had 139 yards and a touchdown through the air. And, after Georgia lost so embarrassingly within their home state, I imagine that if Georgia were to make it through Michigan and face off against Alabama again, they would really want it. They would really want that rematch, and I don't think Alabama should underestimate Georgia this year as well. And I don't think Michigan should underestimate Georgia as well, and I don't think Georgia should underestimate Michigan. The 2nd-ranked Michigan Wolverines enter this matchup with a 12-1 record after they went on to win the Big Ten. In the conference, they finished with an 8-1 record, as they went on to beat Ohio State they wanted to beat 13th-ranked Iowa for the title. But of course, looking at their path to get there, looking at the ranked teams they would have to face, the first ranked team that Michigan actually faced was their first loss of the season. It came in week 9 as they faced off against, or it came in week 8 as they faced off against 8th-ranked Michigan State. Michigan State would go on to come from behind to beat Michigan. Going into the 4th quarter, Michigan was up 30-22, as they were going to be led by Cade McNamara, who threw for almost 400 yards, and he threw for 2 touchdowns. Their leading wide receiver, Andrell Anthony, finished with 155 yards and 2 touchdowns. But it would go on to be Michigan State winning it off of a 23-yard touchdown run from their running back, Kenneth Walker, with about 5 minutes left. That would be the first lead that Michigan State would take all game, and they actually ran away with it. And following that matchup, Michigan State had the lead in the Big Ten. And then Michigan's next ranked opponent would be their last regular season game of the season before the Big Ten matchup. They faced off against the 2nd-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, who came into this matchup as the team who was favored out of the Big Ten to make it into the college football playoff. Michigan would go on to beat Ohio State 42-27. They won this matchup by 15 after they outscored Ohio State by 2 touchdowns in the second half, which would be the difference. Michigan was led by their starting quarterback, Cade McNamara, who threw for 159 yards, and then their starting running back, Hassan Haskins, was their biggest performer. He had 169 yards on the ground, as he finished with 5 of the team's 6 rushing touchdowns. All their touchdowns came on the ground. And then not to mention Aiden Hutchinson would go on to finish with 7 tackles and 3 sacks, as he is also regarded as one of the nation's top prospects, if he's not the top prospect. So following their win and loss against ranked opponents in the regular season, Michigan would go on to face off against the 13th ranked Iowa Hawkeyes in the Big Ten Championship. Michigan ended up beating Iowa 42-3 as Iowa took a nice shellacking. Michigan would be led by their quarterback, Cade McNamara, threw for 169 yards and a touchdown. Hassan Haskins had 2 touchdowns on the ground. And following this matchup, of course, Michigan they took Ohio State's number 2 spot going into it, and now they come into this college football playoff with the number 2 seed, as they will face off against the 3rd-ranked Georgia Bulldogs. I personally think that the Georgia Bulldogs will win this matchup and not even make it close. But it'll be a very interesting matchup to see what happens, as the winners of both these matchups will face off against one another in the college football championship. And I believe the college football championship is going to be played in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. That game, I believe, will be on Monday, January 10th. But until then, I'm going to do a preview once this matchup is done tomorrow. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening to all 11 minutes of this piece. I really do hope all is well. And I will catch you with another episode of The Elite right after this, as I will preview what's going on for the 2022 year as I unveil each 2022 list of The Elite. Thanks for following everything that I've been doing for the 2021 year. Once again, I hope all is well. And I'll catch you with another episode tomorrow. Peace out.